I absolutely adore Scythe. For a period of about 18 months, it was a staple at board game meetups until 7 of us burned out on the Rise of Fenris campaign. However, in spite of spending so much time with the game, I don't feel quite qualified to review it for a lot of reasons. The biggest one being that I don't actually own Scythe, and because of that, the version of Scythe that I ended up playing was a maximalist 5 to 7 players, every expansion currently available, and luxurious premium Kickstarter components that just felt really good and contributed to the overall experience. I've never bothered playing with the automata. I've never played with less than 5 players or with the extra player boards from the first expansion. I don't know if the storage solution out of the box is adequate because it was immediately replaced by a custom set of wooden paneling provided by Broken Token. There are a lot of questions I can't confidently answer because I got to enjoy someone else's purchase. What I can confidently say is that if your regular playgroup frequently includes 5 or more people, all of those people are competitively inclined, and have the willingness to replay the game in order to better understand its rhythms, then I wholeheartedly recommend Scythe for your collection. However, it'll cost around $200, and that doesn't include the cool storage solutions or upgraded components I mentioned earlier. If you want that, then it'll cost you an additional $150. That's almost new console price point, and is what's really preventing me from buying my own copy, because it's hard for me to justify spending that much money when I already have access to the game through one of my playgroups, and I'm in that blessedly lucky spot of having multiple playgroups that could potentially enjoy Scythe. It's possible to pick up the base game for $90 MSRP, but at that point I'd also encourage you to pick up Invaders from Afar for another $30. That expansion allows Scythe to support up to 7 players, and is an expansion that is better obtained sooner rather than later. A big reason for that is the changes provided by Invaders are a bit subtle. The core game of Scythe has a small amount of randomization through faction and production board selection. You can kind of think of it as randomizing where your pieces start in a game of chess. Some combinations are stronger than others, but it doesn't mean that you'll often be faced with different openings that eventually lead into stronger or weaker mid-games depending on how you adjust. Invaders from Afar accentuates this by adding 2 new factions and 2 new production boards. The new production boards will slot perfectly in with the existing set of 5 and can be used right away by novice and veteran players alike. They follow the same pattern of recruitment, production, movement, and mustering as the other boards, and like the core game, the only real difference is how the optional bottom actions hand out coins. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the 2 new factions added by the expansion. Both the Togawa Shogunate and Clan Albion lack the mobility available to all the other factions, which, ironically, make them much more complex and difficult to play. To extend my chess analogy, imagine if your rook, bishop, knight, and queen kept their normal movement restrictions but could only move 1 space. The game tries to offset this restriction by having fewer rivers and lakes preventing either faction from accessing the center of the map, but this trade-off isn't enough to offset the faction's inability to easily reposition their mechs or workers across the board. Scythe, at its core, is a game about territory acquisition and resource extraction, which is something that the base game factions can do much more easily when they get their faction speed upgrade. Neither Togawa nor Albion get to have the same room for error as the base 5, and as a result can be a bit punishing for new players. I would know this because that's how I first started playing the game. Mistakes in Scythe are generally poorly planned actions that delay your goals by some number of turns, so I always felt like mistakes cost an additional turn because my mechs moved half as fast. However, if playing a faction with super tight margins interests you and you're willing to explore the extra territory mechanics introduced by both Togawa and Albion, then it can be really rewarding to wrangle these unwieldy factions to a top spot at the table. But again, my recommendation bumps the game's price to $120, which is already steep, especially if you don't have the friendly local game store with a complete demo copy on hand. Luckily, there's a pretty cheap way of playing the game yourself, and it's the digital edition of Scythe I've been using for B-roll this whole time. Grabbing it in the first expansion goes for only $30, and it frequently goes on sale for even less. If that's still too pricey, the mobile ports go for about half that, and it's my understanding that it's the exact same game, just on iOS and Android. Ironically, the digital ports illustrate how similar Scythe is to the granddaddy of 4X strategy games, Sid Meier's Civilization. Hexagonal map tiles provide resources that you use to then build units or structures or upgrades or recruits. Doing each of those things fulfills objectives which both end the game faster and provide bonuses for your final score. But the comparison is a bit superficial because Scythe harshly restricts your actions. Unlike your average game of Civ, where you can move your units across the map, build a farm, recruit a great person, research the wheel, develop democracy, and build the pyramids all in the same turn, Scythe doesn't have that freedom. Each production board randomly pairs 4 sets of 2 actions together, and you're not allowed to take the same action twice. On top of that, many of the actions require you to pay some kind of resource, and if you lack the ability to pay for the action, you don't get to take it. This gives maximizing your action economy a kind of chess-like quality where it becomes critically important to plan out moves several turns in advance. It's wickedly smart, and while the big box version does contain a sort of automata system that allows for solo play, the digital adaptation on Steam and iOS also contain AI components that don't require you to roll dice or do any upkeep for. Unfortunately, what the digital adaptation of Scythe don't have are the final two expansions, the Wind Gambit and Rise of Fenris. The former, an interesting if relatively unessential expansion, and the latter, the best expansion for the entire game. Now, in the Wind Gambit's defense, we never played with the resolutions cards, which are a set of 8 tiles which provide new rules to change the way a game of Scythe ends. Usually a game ends immediately after a player accomplishes their 6th objective, but those tiles may instead end the game once a player controls 10 territories, or once everyone has taken 20 turns. It's possible that these resolution tiles have the same impact as something I'll get to once I talk about Rise of Fenris, but my lack of experience means I can't advocate for them one way or another. What I can confidently talk about is the central focus of this expansion, the airships. Unfortunately, these can be a bit hit or miss. Besides some chunky flying boat miniatures, the airships also come with randomly selected aggressive and passive traits. The passive traits tend to influence movement in some shape or form, while the aggressive traits determine what the airship is able to carry and what happens when the airship is found in enemy territory. On paper, this seems fine. In practice, only the aggressive traits, which allow the airship to carry workers, have significant impact on how the game plays. While the traits that allow you to carry resources render the airships almost unusable because moving resources around is generally unnecessary, while moving workers can accelerate your game plan by 1 or 2 turns, open up new strategies, or create a buffer for mistakes. It makes the experience feel a bit uneven overall, and so it's harder to recommend this expansion, even though I like it. A much easier recommendation is the Rise of Fenris. It's potentially the best expansion available for Scythe, and while I recommend picking up Invaders from afar as soon as you can if you have a playgroup that frequently includes 5 or more players, smaller playgroups can skip Invaders and grab Fenris right away. Its main selling point is a very cool campaign that serves as a kind of showcase for newly introduced rules components. The best part is that it's a non-legacy campaign, so you don't have to throw away your almost $200 investment after you're done, and you can replay it with the same group of friends. The only problem with this campaign is its over-reliance on hidden information to surprise the player to give a false sense of discovery, which I found both unnecessary and just detrimental to the experience. The biggest issue with the hidden information of the campaign is that it gives experienced players a massive advantage over anyone playing the campaign for the first time, and the rulebook doesn't provide any guidance to actually resolve this problem. At least none that I could find just kind of skimming through it again, and none that I could actually remember off the top of my head. The other issue is that the competitive nature of the campaign means the uncertainty of a mission's rewards may cause players to ignore a mission's novel rule setup and instead just play a normal game of Scythe to the best of their ability, which is a shame because the campaign does really a good job of presenting new mechanics and components to the game, but the uncertainty of certain outcomes just pushes people away. Luckily, Rise of Fenris is built in such a way that after the campaign, or if you just want to skip the campaign altogether, each mission can be converted into a special module for non-campaign play. Most of these modules have a phenomenal impact on how Scythe plays out, especially the modules that change how the objective track works. The default objective set for Scythe does a good job at letting players plan out their strategies in advance by allowing almost every action to potentially contribute to achieving a goal. However, Rise of Fenris provides a set of objective modules that throw all of that out the window. Suddenly, certain actions no longer directly contribute to completing an objective, but may still be important to do in order to position yourself better at the end of the game. To give an example from another game, imagine if you were playing a game of chess, but instead of the winner being decided by capturing the opponent's king, it was decided by which player could move any of their pawns to the opponent's back row. This changes the dynamic of the game considerably, from the very opening moves all the way until the end. And these objective modules alone make Rise of Fenris totally worth it. It's something I absolutely recommend that people pick up when they can afford it. Of course, it is the most expensive of all the expansions because it comes with the most stuff, but I absolutely adore it. Unfortunately, unlike the base game and Invaders from Afar, there aren't really cheap and convenient ways to experience either the Wind Gambit or Rise of Fenris. I know that digital tabletop experiences exist and are out there, but I don't have a lot of experience with them at all, and my initial impressions of Tabletop Simulator is that it feels like the Unix equivalent of playing a board game. A bit complex, super dependent on exploiting the free labor of a passionate modding community, and reliant on the user adapting to its own UX experience rather than following modern convention. But if you got the patience and curiosity to wrangle what these digital experiences have, then go for it. I definitely know the entirety of Scythe is available on Tabletop Simulator through a combination of official DLC and mods, and it all comes at a fraction of the price of getting a fully decked out physical copy. I love Scythe with all of its expansions and encourage anyone with a competitively inclined friend group to check it out in any way you can afford, whether that's digital or analog. Thanks for watching.